Hello and welcome to our part one session on feedback called Feed Up, Establishing Expectations for Success. My name is Julia Kiter and I'm one of the Instructional Effectiveness Specialists here at Baker College Online and Center for Graduate Studies. My partner is Carol Walling, and later on in this session, if you have any additional questions, you can certainly contact us directly to be able to support your learning in any professional development that we offer here at Baker College. So we're going to get started here real quick in terms of thinking about how we want to structure our conversations for professional development. Our Instructional Effectiveness Specialist team has been working hard to develop collaboration and expectations for how we function in professional development as well as in working partnership with our faculty. So I'm not going to take time to read over everything, but just looking at some of the bold words, this is how we function. We pause, paraphrase, pose questions, put ideas on the table, provide data when it's relevant, and pay attention to ourselves and others and presume positive intentions. So you'll see these behaviors modeled from our Instructional Effectiveness Specialist team, as well as other members of our Baker College family. So that is in the hopes that you will equally share that with each other, leveling out the opportunities for greater collaboration, and then eventually share that with your students. So in thinking about feedback, one of the things that I'm drawn to is my own feedback in the real world. So, my best example is there are always opportunities to provide feedback, whether it's online feedback when you go to a fast food restaurant or feedback from the doctor. Recently had an appointment and they'll send you an immediate survey. They want your feedback. Sometimes it's in the mail. So thinking about, that feedback cycle in terms of the opportunities that we provide students and giving them feedback. But then really what happens after that? Do we even know that the company has read over the feedback that we've provided for them? And really what are they anticipating? Before we even get to that point, however, we have to understand the expectations of that feedback, not just in terms of the questions, but what's really going to be done with that feedback. I know I personally have filled out surveys and evaluations on feedback and then really got nothing in return. If it was proactively stated in a transparent way by the company how they were planning to use the feedback and what touch points they would make with us, really that would kind of reduce the amount of confusion in terms of actually providing the feedback. How is this actually being used? So the question I have is, what are we expecting in return for providing feedback? And as faculty members, we can think about that in a more proactive way. So we should just tell students what they can expect. So before we get started, you have probably already filled out the self-reflection form. This is what it would look like. And that's just a brief survey gathering some prior data to be used in future professional development. It also helps Carol and I really figure out the practices that are already happening within classrooms. We have such a wide range of exposures to classrooms and in different ways. So this is a moment for you to be self-reflective. There are also 3 articles later available in this recorded session, and one of them I pulled a quote from. It says, "To be effective, feedback needs to be clear, purposeful, meaningful, and compatible with students' prior knowledge and to provide logical connections." So we are trying to establish some prior knowledge from you, the faculty, in terms of what you're already doing and some things for you to think about. Do I really do that, and to what extent? So it's helping us gather some of that information. We also wanted to share with you some guiding questions to really frame your thinking. So at some point during this video presentation, you might want to take a few notes and maybe even stop at some point for you to be able to self-reflect again on some of these questions as they launch you into learning more about the Feed Up process. So John Hattie and Helen Timperley note that feedback has no effect in a vacuum. To be powerful in its effect, there must be a learning context to which feedback is addressed. And that's what we'll be talking about, is how do we provide students with that context so they understand not only the expectations of the assignments that they're going to be engaging in, but really the norms of expectations from you as the faculty in terms of how to behave in the discussion boards. So how do your past experiences with giving students feedback inform your approaches? So as adult learners, we come to the table with our own experiences as students, but we also have experiences in the real world, as well as facilitating courses here at Baker College Online and Center for Graduate Studies. How do those past experiences influence your approaches to providing feedback? What factors do you consider before giving feedback? Is it the course? Is it the level? Is it the population of students you have? Is it the time of year? And then finally, how do you use your knowledge of the content and about your learners to determine the type of feedback that you will give? So these 3 questions really do shape a context and provide you with a frame of thinking as far as, do I do that? How do I do that? And why do I do that? And so that kind of helps narrow the thinking that we'd like for you to be able to move the conversation forward about Feed Up. So here's a brief explanation of the Feed Up, Feedback, and Feed Forward. We're going to call it the 3-prong approach. This comes from the Formative Assessment Action Plan by Fisher and Fry out of San Diego. And basically, they say Feed Up ensures that students understand the purpose of the assignment, task, or lesson, including how they will be assessed. So sometimes we have the expectations that students already know how they're going to be assessed. They'll just read the rubric, and we make those anticipations and expectations blindly. So what Feed Up is encouraging is a more transparent approach to sharing that information with students in a social context. Feedback provides students with information about their successes and needs, which many faculty like to jump right into the feedback conversation. I provide feedback here, I do that here, but really we want to make sure that we centralize this particular conversation on Feed Up. And then from that, Feed Forward, which guides student learning based on performance data. So what do you do with that information? What do you do with all of the grades and the discussion board conversations? What do you do with that information to actually guide your next instructional approaches? As well as, what do students do next? What are you expecting from them to do next? And all 3 are required if students are to learn at high levels. Each of these components has a guiding question for teachers and students. And I underline that specifically because this is not just a student issue, it's also a teacher issue. They need to know, where am I going? But we also need to know where we're going, looking at course SLOs, evaluating, and looking more intently into the rubrics. And then, how am I doing? Once you get into the mix of providing that feedback, maybe asking yourself as faculty, how am I doing this? Is it really helping students? And in turn, they will ask themselves, how am I doing on the assignment? And finally, where am I going next? What are some next steps and approaches? Sometimes this question isn't always easily answered with, I'm just going to forge ahead, because if students adopted that same philosophy, they would probably get the same results over and over again. So looking at the Feed Up, Feedback, and Feed Forward approach in terms of a 3-prong process to actually providing feedback. And again, we want to make sure that we focus on the Feed Up area in this particular conversation. At the end of this recording, you will have a chance to fill out an action plan. And one thing I want you to think about is that assessment feedback is a social practice. Here we have teacher and student. And so what is the interaction between teacher and student to actually dialogue about the feedback process itself? Lecturers and students need to see feedback as an integral, iterative element of teaching and not as an add-on. Sometimes students just look at the grade and they think that feedback is an add-on. And sometimes faculty think the same thing. Oh, I have to provide feedback, and maybe I'll do that in a canned way. But really, it's an iterative process, and it should be a social practice. So as we look at the closed feedback system, oftentimes we can see the sender initiates the message. That might be the student on one end saying, here, I submitted my assignment. And the receiver accepts the message and provides feedback. And that's you providing feedback in the Grade Center and the inline comments. But then what happens? We leave it very open-ended. And what we need to do is make sure that the sender verifies the message was received and actually has a plan of action. So in that initial stage, the sender initiates the message.